Our world continues to change and push us in ways we have not been challenged before. On this show, we talk about these challenges, how to be aware of them, face them, and overcome them in your life. This is David Waldas, creator of the Aligned Living System.
And I'm Nick Musica, Aligned Living Coach. Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast.
Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast. I'm here this week with guest Amy Guerrero. And I'll do a quick intro for her, but it was kind of cool. We met through a woman that was helping both of us with our business, who just saw the connection that was obvious for how our businesses overlap, how what we offer overlaps, and how our insight into things can really help, the same people. Yet we're coming at it from, a slightly different angle, slightly different language, but a lot of the same tools. And so I'll read Amy's intro here. It's funny, I never read anything, so this is kind of fun. I'm usually just, stream of consciousness is very much how Amy is as well. So we'll start out with something rather formal. So Amy's on a messy, wild journey to heal all her trauma by the age of 40. She stumbled, pun intended, into a conscious, sober lifestyle and into her deeper purpose to teach people nervous system regulation. She was confident from much lived experience she was confident from much lived experience in treatment centers and inpatient facilities that no single approach to healing and living a conscious lifestyle would work for her. So why would it work for anyone else? Today, she guides people to heal past traumas, to feel more freedom, pleasure, and purpose while creating healthy, thriving relationships. Outside of running her coaching business, Regulate with Amy, you can find her practicing what she teaches, cooking healthy, delicious food, practicing yoga, playing outdoors, and strengthening her connection to herself to serve the energy of love and teach others to come home to themselves. When we stay curious together, we can experience unimaginable freedom. Yeah, I love that intro. It really lines up in a lot of ways with what we've been doing with Aligned Living. It's all about coming home to ourselves and all about our nervous system, all about dealing with all that outside stimulus, our coping mechanisms, and reworking the coping mechanisms and going, well, some of those sure didn't work for me. They seemed like the right thing to pull off the shelf at the time, but I got to restructure a lot of this. And when I'm ready, I'm ready. And so, yeah, welcome. So glad you're here.
Thank you. Yeah. And I love the restructuring, like what I call my methodology is regrooving, because, we're just taking those pathways that kept us safe and survival and in all of the coding that this world teaches us to live in, intergenerationally. And then as we start to regroove, I think the hilarious part about patterns and grooves is that before we actually step into our new groove, before we stepped into our aligned living, the pattern comes up the strongest. I say it's like a roach in New Orleans. It's like these things that you think you've sprayed the spray on them. They're laying on their back, pretending to be dead, and then they fly away. And you're like, oh my gosh, you're still here. That is what a survival strategy is, right? It's it's going to be there always and forever to keep us safe and to keep us alive. But we are in the business of thriving and aligning. And for me, becoming more open and vulnerable than I've thought was possible ever, or than I was shown what was possible ever in my lifetime. Definitely didn't have teachers and parents that were coding me with go be bigger. It was oh my gosh, don't do that. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do that. And so it's realigning with all of that. It takes practice.
Yeah. And it takes, it's funny. I was just about to use the word bravery, to go in, but the funny thing about this is I feel like, I'm curious your take on this. When I first work with clients, they're like, oh, this is showing up, there's an embarrassment and some stuff. They're just I'm ready to talk about it because I got to get rid of this shit. This is not working for me. But, we look at the next layer underneath it and there's something that's a lot for them to take in. But at a certain point in this work, when we find our bullshit, when we find our gunk and our, the things that are just oh my God, I can't believe that's still there. We get excited because we know now we can move it out of the way. And while the first steps into this work, I always feel like for most people are just like, oh shit, like, am I really ready to take this on? And maybe the world's shown me, well, I really don't have an option. Like, it's time. But there's a transition that happens pretty quick into it, I think, for a lot of people, where they just get super excited when they find their bullshit, because they're like, yes, there it is. There's that layer. Now I can change my coping mechanism, my response to trauma. I can engage with it in a different way. And so, yeah, has that been your experience too? Or there's
Oh,
how would
I'm
you
just like
describe
so
that?
excited. Woo. I'm excited that you're like taking us right here, because the first thing that comes through is the difference in the energy of the masculine and the energy of the feminine. And I'm actually just going to speak in gender and sex now, in like what genitals you have. Like
Right.
masculine men with, with the upbringing that they've had, and feminine women with the upbringing they'd had, so when we have this already in our bodies, when this is our sex, our gender,
Mhm.
our genitals at first, right? Like there is this difference in the way that our mind actually operates. So like
Sure.
whatever you claim to be now in your life, your mind is still operating through the lens of, this coding. And
Yeah.
so I love what you're saying, because it's like, I think that I actually, so many of the women that I serve have hyper masculine energy and
Mhm.
energetic systems. Obviously, all the men that I serve are super masculine men. Like, they're just there, but they didn't know how to actually be with it
Mhm.
in a way where they were erect and open. And the women didn't know how to be open, like at all, before they really, settled into this work. And so what I think is so interesting about what you shared about this bravery is that, yes, when you find your bullshit, especially when you come from this like hyper masculine lens, then there becomes this like focus, like track of like, ooh, I
Warrior.
can fix that,
Yeah.
I can change that. Yeah. And so it evokes exactly the warrior archetype, and like, and in the nervous system, that fight flight response, right? Which is actually beautiful inertia and
Mhm.
energy to start the wave
Mhm.
of regrooving, or of, creating the alignment. And so I'm so glad you started there, because like so many people will make that wrong in the world. Like, oh, well, you're not in your feminine. And I'm like, well, how in the world could I possibly take that survival strategy down and just soften and be vulnerable and be chaotic, when the world has taught me, and I have survived for so long through finding my courage and like, oh, I have a problem, let me go fix it.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
And like my language is so much different now, but how you're starting this conversation is so beautiful, because that's the thing, right? And when we talk to people where they're at
Mhm.
versus where they're going to be in 3 weeks or three
Right,
months
right.
it's so much more helpful to actually creating sustainable change, right?
It's so funny too. I know you channel a lot too, and you're just open, it comes through you. And one of the challenges I often have is my guides will show me kind of like the cosmic joke in it all. I always talk about, like, what's actually funny about our disorders, what's actually funny about our coping mechanisms and our trauma. And inevitably, probably more so with my female clients than my male clients. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. It's probably pretty even. Like, I'll have to like really fight smiling and maybe even laughing, because there's like, I'll see the pattern and it shows up as so funny, right? But it's just not funny yet to the client. Right?
Yeah,
I'm just
totally.
like, all
There's
right,
a
well, this
specific giggle.
there's something
Exactly.
just trust me, this is going to be funny soon. Right now, you're probably going to want to punch me in the face, but this will be funny really soon.
Well, and and for the humanity of us, bringing that levity to it is like something that I'm grateful for. I have like this little witchy giggle that comes out, and people like will like glare at me when it comes out, and I'm like, I'll just point up. I'm just like,
Yeah, I'm glad you find my trauma
sweet.
so amusing. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and also I've been there. So my
Yeah, absolutely.
humanity has the lived experience of it,
Mhm.
which isn't, I'm so glad that my guides took me all the way down to the very, very bottom,
Mhm.
because it can be it can be actually an embodied giggle and an embodied joke now.
Right.
Where when I was like, firemen would kick down my door because I would be locked in my apartment for so many days, like trying to kill myself with alcohol.
Mm.
And I would laugh when they came in because my soul knew the whole time that like this was my way out. This was my way through. But like the humans around me did not understand that. And so they'd be like, why are you laughing right now? And I'm like, because you have to like see the hilarity in like this thing that I've done to myself. Look at my apartment, like look at my body, like what's happening right now doesn't make any sense. And I know I'm learning something from it. And they were just like, who is this woman? She's blowing like a 4.4 in alcohol. She should be legally dead. And she's saying all of these like profound things. I'm like, yeah, this is just my journey. So
Yeah.
I really get it.
I think that's, for all of us that are really here to help people at these deep levels, we've been through it. Like we've signed up for some serious shit we're going to have to deal with. And, it's almost like an ethnic joke, when it's like our own ethnicity, we can joke about it. Right.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah, exactly.
like I'm laughing at
Exactly.
myself
Yes,
here.
totally.
Right?
Oh, yeah. And what a relief it is because, when people come from this like hyper masculine, I need to fix things, then there's a rigidity that comes into the work.
Right.
And something that I'm so big about is like, do not flog yourself with the work. And so, like giggling at it, having fun with it, like when you stay curious, you can experience unimaginable freedom. It's that rigidity that comes in that like, I need to get here by this point, and
Yeah.
that's how the world is going to like name me successful. That actually takes us out of alignment and out of regrooving a new way of life. And so it's just like that fun, that playfulness is so necessary. And that's where I think like the feminine chaos is so welcome here, because she's like, I do not care what your little plans are.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to have my way with you.
It's so funny. I was with a client
Oh.
yesterday. It was very masculine and life very much in order. And there was something that was really, they were struggling with, and they were seeking relief. And, they were like, when this happens, then I'll feel okay type thing. And of course that's the pattern, very masculine, right? Like once I can accomplish this, and I was like, it's funny. And this person's very direct. So what came through is I'm like, seeking relief is bullshit, right? Like it's, 10 minutes later, you're gonna just find the next discomfort and then try to seek relief from that. Like we got to stop seeking relief. We got to be playful and curious and all these things that you're saying where we relax into it and go like, what like relief is bullshit, right? It's like, if I need that, I'm always going to need that. It's not a solution to a problem. It's, just the next stair that the stairway to nowhere, right? That I'm just going to keep taking the
It's a
next step.
dopamine hit too.
Yeah.
And so like
Yeah.
from the lens of addiction, which I don't usually use that word often, but like from the lens of that, it becomes a dopamine hit, which then the body chemistry actually gets chemically dependent on. And so it's always that next thing to fix. And goodness gracious, that creates an exhausted nervous system.
Absolutely.
And an unaligned life, because from that exhausted nervous system, there is no room for creativity, because the nervous system only has like a finite amount of energy. And when that energy is just directed towards that next fix, that next dopamine hit, that next check mark on the box of like, oh, relief, oh, I feel so much better. It's like, it's like masturbating just to come. It's like, okay, great. It feels awesome, but it's like a pelvic sneeze for a woman and a man in my experience with working with so many. It's just like, what did I just do? I just blew out my life force energy, and I'm not creating like the sustainable infinite flow that I really desire from my orgasm, from my life. And, it very similar to the way that they'll behave or I've behaved around money. Right. It's like all of these things we can resource back to, what are you really going for here? Because if you're going to check the box, You're going to have fast, quick orgasms. You're going to spend your money as fast as you make it. You're going to go in and out of relationships. You're going to eat the thing to find relief. You're going to do the things to check the box, but you're never going to stop chasing something.
Yeah, you're never
You're
okay.
going to create a whole life. Yeah, you're never actually okay, because if you don't have a problem to solve, then you feel worthless and useless, and your mind turns on and it starts ruminating. And woof, that's a scary place to be.
Yeah, and there's just no end. There's no win. Um, there's wins that last 10 seconds, maybe 10 minutes on a good one.
Exactly. Oh gosh, I can go a million directions from here. And just, how do we start to change this pattern?
Mhm.
And I have like a lot of like expansion and also like compassion and depth of love in my heart right now for this conversation, because in my personal life, where I really leave my coach, my guide, my mentor, like I show up in my humanity that knows all this stuff, that's listening to my guides, that's still whole and full in all of this. And my friends and my lovers are not exactly on the same path that I am.
Right, right.
And so when I witness them in the struggle of overthinking and ruminating, and I'm like kind of cool and embodied and smooth, oh my God, it's so painful, because it's like I have all the answers, but that's not what I'm there for in that relationship.
Right,
In that
right.
relationship, I'm there to be Amy,
Yeah.
fully Amy, but not to coach him or
Hmm.
tell him how to do it, or tell him, I'm like, I see you, and I love you from the spot, but like, that's it. And so I feel in this moment like so much compassion for that, because it's like, it's intense out there.
It is, and I mean, it's, I fluctuate a lot between the isolation of, kind of protecting my energy versus, being back out there more. And that same piece that it's, and I think it's really what drove me a lot to create more, and I'd say it's a work in progress of more community with aligned living, is, inviting more and more people where what we're talking about is their goal. And what we're talking about is their priority as far as how they're going to live their life. And I'm curious, there's two things I wanted to get into here. It feels really relevant. One is I often talk about our perspective, how we're engaging in form of consciousness and where we're
Yeah.
locating that consciousness. Meaning that, whether we're vibrating in resonance with self, or whether we're, really hooked in to something out here or something in here that's, a reflection of all those traumas. And a lot of what aligned living is about finding that frequency that is you, locating ourselves there, living from that place, and then noticing, all the old programs and unhooking from them as they come up. Again, like they don't necessarily go away, but we see them and go, oh, there's that one option. But now I'm actually have this spaciousness inside me where I have another option, and I can actually choose from this location, from this consciousness, what feels actually more in resonance with me, what feels more like me. And as we go through that process, there becomes a bigger split between the old way of being and really what's in alignment for us. And when we pop back and forth, it starts to hurt, rather than feel good. And when it starts to hurt, people are like, oh, this is so hard. But I'm like, this is great. Like, you now have this built-in mechanism that says, you don't want to do this, right? And it used to be a built-in mechanism that goes, that feels like a pretty good idea, right? And so, yeah, I'm curious, as you talk about with your language and nervous system, and how does that kind of resonate with you versus, and how does that fit in with your work, and does that all make sense?
It's all exactly the same in different language. Yeah, I mean, the nervous system is designed for one thing: to keep us alive. So when everything is frequency, period. The nervous system is consistently, without our conscious mind, neurocepting, and this is where people get really messed up, is we're neurocepting frequency all the time. But because the world has become so dependent on the 20%, we only process 20% through our mind, our brain. Everything else is afferent through the body, right? But we've grown up in this culture, and it's only starting to change now, where we've used the mind and made it stronger and more important than the 80% of our body. Oh, what were we doing? I've always
Yeah,
been a frequency gal. Like, frequency has
right,
been my way forever and ever, but I was taught to not depend on it, that I couldn't touch it, that my intuition was bullshit.
right. And
Right.
that's for the stuff
And
that's less important too, right? When it's a really important decision, you got to use your least effective part of you to make it. Right.
right, which, I mean, my goodness, no, no wonder I numbed myself with alcohol for so long, because I
Sure.
was so scared of this. I was so scared of this beautiful body of mine.
Mhm.
And, so what you're saying basically is like, how do we start to attune to that frequency that is ourself? And so I work in parts work, I work in nervous system work, I work in somatic experiencing. So put all these three things together, and it's like, our nervous system is designed to scan for safety or danger. Basically, we're always scanning for danger. How do we start to attune ourselves to scan for safety instead, to scan
Mhm.
for what's right instead of what's wrong?
Mhm.
That takes a massive regrooving, a massive realignment, in your words, a massive change of frequency, because to stop focusing on the outside world it's life threatening to the nervous system.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like on that first part of your path with your students, it's like you're asking them to focus on themselves, and they're like, oh no, that's too selfish. But from my perspective of what I would correct and adjust that as, is I'm like, actually your nervous system is literally keeping you safe right now. So we have to find a new safety. We have to anchor into a new safety. And that takes practice to get the system, the physical system, to start attuning to that. And then we have all these younger parts that we've created because we've fragmented ourselves into 200 million different parts, probably. I don't know. I haven't met all mine yet, but like I know a lot of them really well. And then we have to, we choose to create a relationship with these parts. And then we start to bring these parts in. And then the frequency becomes, in your words, more coherent. The record, in my words, starts to create the new groove.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
And then, but there's still all these skips and stuff in there. And so it's constantly attuning to the frequency. And
Right.
I definitely use frequency all the time in my language, because that cognitive and mm, somatic dissonance that
Mhm.
we create is a survival strategy. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing right with it. It's just like, oops, that's too much. Oh,
Yeah.
that's too
Yeah.
little. Oh, that's just right. Stay there. I like that. More of that, please. Until the body gets comfortable with it, and then it can expand from there. And then when it can expand, then we have to sit there for a minute or a year or 3 years, sometimes 5 years, or sometimes a week. I don't know. It just depends on our systems, and let that root down and
Mhm.
become our new groove and become our new aligned way of life.
Right.
And I think that like where people get really bored and uncomfortable is in that spot of letting it simmer, of letting it saturate the cells, of letting it become the new way of life. They're like, this is fucking boring. And
Yeah.
then they
Yeah.
go for the dopamine hits and the quick fixes and all the things. And
I'm
I'm sure
taking
you
that. I
find
was
this in
taking
your
another lap around the
students.
tree. You done? Are you done here
Exactly.
yet? You taking another lap around the tree? You know, it's
Ah,
and
geez.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's funny because I'll often have that conversation with clients too, when they're in a place where they're like, "Oh, this is so much. Like, there's so much happening. The energy's moving so fast." I'm like, very soon you're going to feel like you're plateauing. Very soon this is going to reach a stabilized point, and you're going to get bored, and you're going to crave this experience. Like everybody's, again, it's like, seeking relief. Like when you learn to love that transformational part, like to me, the hardest part, is when I know there's going to be a plateau, when it's like the integration time and you're like, okay, I'm not getting anything new right now. It's kind of like driving an old car. In some ways you're like,
Yeah.
well, it's still nice, but it's not very interesting anymore.
Or like after the first 18 months of a new relationship.
Sure,
right? Like,
sure.
let's like bring it to something like everyone feels, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
the relationship gets steady and strong and the sex is awesome and like everything's flowing and like, we're farting in front of each other and we're just like, whatever, babe, like we're not flushing the toilet all the time. Like all these things get so comfortable. And then someone starts to make it wrong. And it's
Right,
like, actually, this is what we were going for. So instead, let's purposely, consciously bring something new and spicy into this relationship
right,
to expand, to get bigger, rather than to mess up this beautiful foundation that we both desired. Right. And then it becomes fun again. But if we're
sure,
not
sure.
conscious of that, someone will blow the relationship up in like minus, it's like it's just like I'll start counting when I'm working with couples. I'm just like, oh, one of y'all's gonna do something weird soon. I'm gonna be here with the popcorn watching.
Time to go back into our childhood and find how we found safety in some destructive way
Oh
and
yeah, let me
reintroduce
push
it
up
into my
against
current life.
you.
That's great. So, I think one of the things uh, that just seems obvious for our discussion too is the masculine feminine energy.
Mm,
And, I've been working with it a lot more in line living lately. And to me, so much of it, when we look at that masculine energy, for so many men, particularly when they start this work, and so many spiritual men, that they are finding this other part of themselves that has a lot less structure, and they enter in this kind of spiritual place, and it feels so, it's like about feeling good sometimes. And then there's this interesting thing of how do I reclaim my structure? How do I actually bring shape to myself when I'm learning to kind of be in more flow with it? And it feels very counterintuitive to most people. And there's a lot we do energetically with aligned living where we're actually, working with our spine. And once we've been able to bring ourselves into alignment, it's great to feel all that, kind of expansiveness and all of that really euphoric feeling and experience. And a lot of people get stuck there. They're like, they start to, their life kind of starts to fade off or just kind of drift in one way or another because they're not bringing structure to it. And talking particularly, well, I mean, I guess we're talking about masculine energy in both men and women, but it's
yeah.
it's really an interesting piece when we start to bring that structure, how it tends to affect men and women differently, when we bring that in. But that piece of it, and to me, it's why I often avoided spiritual circles, was I felt like there was so much of it that was kind of just feel good, without, well, what are we really doing here? How are we really living our purpose? How are we really affecting ourselves and the world around us, other than just being on this, I mean, what's the difference between this and just sitting around smoking weed? you know?
We're doing a
Um,
bunch of ecstasy.
yeah,
Seriously.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm,
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm curious,
mm,
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that masculine feminine
yeah.
dance and what it looks, or how you experience it, as far as like, I mean, I'd always talk about as energetic structure that then turns into a way of being, that turns into a feeling, that turns into how we show up and how people feel around us, or how we feel inside of ourselves. And so, yeah, I'd love to
Yeah.
hear you talk about that a
I
little
can
bit.
talk about this all day long, David, all day long. Um, so my home away from home per se would have been to be just all in my masculine structure on the outside and a total like soft, like vulnerable mess on the inside that I wouldn't really let my partners feel or see or touch very often. And definitely in like the consulting real estate world where I lived a lot of my life, it was just like I always said I drank like a man, I fucked like a man, and I did business like a man, and I handled my money like a man because I grew up in Texas and that's what I knew to do. And it was in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and like there wasn't a lot of room for women like me who kind of had decided early that I was going to live differently as well than most people. Like I knew I didn't want children. Like I just knew I was going to do life a little bit different. And I was into open relationships very young. And so people are just like, you're doing it wrong. And I was like, oh, this is so hard. And so I really turned on my masculine, really out of protection, so that people couldn't penetrate me. But inside I was dying because I'm so feminine. Like I'm just chaotic and all the things. But I would drink to let that out. I would drink to let that flow. And so when we're coming into this place where we're men, particularly like with the genitalia that claim the masculine, especially, I work with a lot of very just masculine men. So I'm not trying to leave anyone out of this conversation. I'm just going to speak to like what I'm really in service to.
Sure.
And they start to feel their chaos. They're so afraid that they're going to turn into a puddle. Right. And for a minute, to alchemize this energy, it is necessary in the safe container to turn into a puddle.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're just like, oh my God, I haven't gotten off the couch in a week and I'm watching rom-coms and what's going on with me and da, da, da. And I'm like, it's okay. We're going to come out. And then that whole time creating that structure that isn't rigid.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I like to say it is like, it's a holding
Mm-hmm.
versus a containing.
Yeah.
Right. There's softer hands on it
Mm-hmm.
than there was of those like structures that nothing else could change. And it's just like this. And it's like, oh, Tony Robbins, please. Like, oh, like gross. Just doesn't do it for me because it's just different in the sense of like, this is how you're supposed to be. Because it activates that nervous system response
Mm-hmm.
of the old pattern. And so how do we create this new structure? Right. And you can hear how my voice changes that like, it feels just right.
Yeah.
And you're not leaking out of it. And for the masculine men, it's like that sex energy, that result-oriented energy will try to leak out of it. And I'm like, ooh, but that's your creative life force. So how do we start like figure eighting that into the frequency of your truth while you hold yourself erect?
Yeah. And that internal stability without trying to control what's going on around you is
Right.
often how it shows up for me, is like when we feel really like we know right where our core is and we come from that place, all of a sudden now there's a playground around us as opposed to all the things that we need to bring into order and structure. And when we can't, talking about for the masculine, for men, like, and when we can't find that stability inside of ourselves, we're just trying to arrange everything around us. And I mean, I see it obviously with women for a different reason. But when I always say we're trying to bail the ocean with a 5-gallon bucket, the tides just keep coming in. And if we're not going to stabilize here, if we're not going to find that sense of self and that shape that we are, that gives us the freedom to play and be kind of a home base, or not kind of, but really a home base where we can operate from. We're always just chasing everything around us, and we're never comfortable. Again,
No.
seeking
And
relief from the discomfort.
yeah. Oh my gosh. And for a feminine bodied woman who like wants the man to find that hole in himself, to find that like, oh, in himself, like it's so painful to watch the chase happen. And the chase, like, oh gosh, it's so frustrating too. Like I'll just be the feminine right now because it's just like, instead of being a teacher, I'm just going to be Amy and like, oh God, it's so painful on the other side of it because like it shoots him up into his mind. And there's all this thinking and I'm like, baby, I can't feel you. Like, where did you go? It's my heart just like, I'm like, this is so painful. And I can feel how painful it is for the man. And he's just like, he has nothing. And then he like wants to make like everything wrong. And like, he's putting his past women on me. And I'm just like, what the fuck is happening right now? But it's like, it's so visceral. And I really like, I'm on a mission in this world to create the spaces for men to be able to feel themselves in the truth and find that like spot. Because like the world needs it. Healthy conscious relationships will change the world is like my bigger mission in the world. And it requires, and this is why I'm such a stand for men, like it requires you, David. It requires the men you teach, like, and it requires us as the feminine bodied women to soften and to let you have it and to stop cutting you in half and to stop like, taking your power away with our like over mommying and over coaching you, because that just takes your structure and makes it rigid because you're going to see us as a threat. So
absolutely.
yeah.
And it's interesting too, because one of the things that's really been showing up a lot for me lately is the idea of what people say they want from us and show us they want from us is not really what they want from us. And I think that's never more true
Give
than
me
with
an
that masculine.
example.
Well, I think that
Can you give
masculine
me?
feminine dance, right? Like where, like for so many women, they don't, you know, they don't make it a safe environment for men, like that you're talking about. That's a perfect example, saying, I want you to show up in your power and take care of me, but I'm also, the moment it feels uncomfortable to me, the moment it feels controlling, the moment it feels, like allowing that dance to happen where it's going to be awkward at first, it's going to be uncomfortable, there's pushback. And so, as men, when we try to go into our masculine energy, if it takes a while for us to dial it in and to come from a safe place and to come from a place that feels safe to the person, we're engaging with.
Yeah.
And the pushback isn't going to be like, ooh, more of that, please. Quite often, until we've dialed in, it's going to be like, I feel like you're controlling me, or I feel like you feel different, like whatever the version of that is.
Right.
It's,
Well, can I say
go ahead.
something?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just like
please.
dying to say
Yeah,
something. Here's my feminine. Um, oh, because like that's my stand for the women,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like for us to hold ourselves there
Mm-hmm.
and get bigger while you're in your figuring it outness.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because I've been with a new lover lately, and he's in the spot, and I'm just like getting bigger, and he's watching me get bigger and giving him more space. And he's like, this is freaky too, because like now I have all this space to like mess it up and you're not going to get mad at me. I'm like, I'm totally not. I'm going to celebrate you. And like that takes a minute to get used to too, because then there's so much love there. And so then that is opening his heart, and he's finding his like erectness in it too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's just so interesting because he's like, I kind of want you to make me wrong because then it'll be easier for me to split. And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do that. Like, I just like you too much.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so for women who struggle with like that sense of urgency, that sense of control, that sense of like, it'll feel better to make him wrong now so I can take control.
Mm-hmm.
Like, come closer to these
Mm-hmm.
spaces that David and I are talking about, because healthy conscious relationships start with you. And there is a requirement from both of us to like really hold ourselves and to feel the discomfort and to open wider in those moments, because when the frequency starts to become coherent to the spaciousness that's being created there,
Mm-hmm.
it is vulnerable. Like there's been lots of tears in this relationship already from both of us. And it's like the most beautiful thing you'll ever experience in life. That is to be alive. That's why we're doing what we're doing in this world. That's what the humanity of having skin and sensation
Mm-hmm.
is all for, is for us to feel God in that way with one another. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like unbelievably life-changing.
Right. And it's funny, I hear from so many female clients that they just want their man to be able to take charge. They want him to, be all these things. And one of the things that we've worked with is where she can go in order to pop him into that place. And it's so fascinating to them because they're like, well, the masculine needs to lead this. But what happens when a woman is holding a lot of masculine energy? And like this example of one of my clients was talking about how, she's taking out the garbage, she's doing all this stuff around the house that feels more masculine, and she wants him to be doing it. And she said that we were playing with the masculine feminine energy. She dropped into her feminine energy, and I think it was the garbage or something like that was just sitting there, and he's talking to her, and she's just holding herself in this soft feminine energy. And all of a sudden, like a light bulb goes on. He's like, oh, and he grabs the trash and brings it out and comes back. And she's like, it was like magic. Like all I had to do was not take on the masculine role, move into my feminine, not actually do the task. And all of a sudden it just hit him that he could do it and he could make my world better. And then he just like, it created such a transformation in him that he was so hungry for, that he didn't know he wanted. And the same thing, it wasn't what they were asking for from each other. But the moment she started doing the dance, like the next week he bought her a day spa package. He's like, I just want you to be so comfortable. And I just like, you just amaze me. And I just want you to feel really taken care of. She's like, what the hell just happened? And it
Yeah.
was all by her not holding the space that she wanted him to hold. She just didn't know she wanted him to hold it yet because she didn't feel safe letting go of it. And by running that experiment, their whole dynamic shifted. And all
In
of a
one
sudden,
simple,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, a new part of him emerged that was so hungry to be there, but just never felt safe being there, was never invited. And so it's amazing how often the invitation can actually come from the feminine, in my experience, much more so than the masculine. All of a sudden the guy's like, oh, I want to do that. I want
Yeah.
to, help you this way.
Yeah.
But just hadn't had the opening or knew how to create the opening.
Mm, I love that story. And in my experience as a woman, and very much, and looking back, like I was in my feminine in my very first relationship, which was a very long relationship. And that's where my dynamic actually started to change. It was in that like disorganized pattern that we had. Um, but and I have so much evidence to show that I am the call.
Right. Yeah.
I am the call all day long. And I can be a
Yeah.
call. I'll be the call on the bus
Mm-hmm.
when I need a seat. I'll be the
Mm-hmm.
call yesterday when I was carrying heavy water bottles and a man ran across the store to carry the water bottles for me. I'm just like, I'm the call.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and he's like, can I do that for you? I'm like, absolutely, please. Like, and it's not damsel in distress. It's just like,
No.
I am the call. And if you want to serve me, please serve me.
Yeah. And
Right.
like I
Like,
always
I'm
see it as
here
an
for it.
energetic structure. It's like what is your frequency? What is the energy you're putting off? And you can have incredible boundaries with it. It isn't about not having boundaries. And I think that gets confusing for people too. That, but it can originate from the masculine or the feminine because it's a dance, and it's like the way it hooks together, it just calls that part out in the other
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. And I love the hand gestures that you're making. And I want to speak to the trauma that I work with too in here. And what you just said, it's like I had leaky sex energy because I
Mhm,
was
mhm.
abused in early childhood and
Right,
just
right.
didn't know that whole chakra center was just wide open.
Sure,
And
sure.
I started my period early. I got boobs when I was like 10. Like I
Mhm,
just was over sexualized most of my
mm,
life. And so I found it was a power very early
mhm.
on.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was just open until I met my teacher 16 years ago. And he's like, when's the first time someone touched you? And we started closing it. And
Mhm.
so for 16 years, I've been working on this exact energy because
Yeah.
what I learned was I was either opened or closed. And it was all based on this like boundary that I put around because I was of fear. Well,
Mhm.
16 years ago, I started practicing the fluidity of being in my feminine and calling in what the men were always looking for, which was the call and the light that I am, not the
Right,
sex that
right.
I can give them. Right. And so for 16 years, I've been practicing this intensely with Kevin, my teacher. And like it has changed my life in so many ways and healed all of that sexual trauma to where like I would not even call them boundaries. They're just like limits and stops and like so
Mhm.
much comfort of just like where I know where I start and end. And I
Mhm.
know what the sex is and how to, my life force and how to share it with you in a way. And so for the women out there and the men out there that have had this sexual trauma and just don't really understand that yet, like please hear what I'm saying, because this is such powerful healing
Mm.
for the rest of your life and really being able to step into the essence of your energetic systems, because that sex energy will cause so much confusion and repetitive experiences of the past, creating more complexity in the energy or the frequency if we speak in your terms,
Mm.
and the fascia and the trauma if we speak in my terms, that that gets created in there. So like what we're talking about today is so powerful.
For sure.
And yeah,
And
that
I think
might
for
have to
people
be
that,
a whole thing on its own,
yeah, yeah, I
David.
know we should probably, we'll wrap up in just a minute here because this conversation could just keep going and going, right?
Yeah.
I think too, just for that piece where people are so afraid to go there, afraid to uncover their sexual trauma, and I'm always like, it's already here, right?
Oh
You're
yeah.
experiencing the worst of it, like because it shows up at the most inopportune times. It makes you, behave in certain ways. It drives us in so much depth. Like the trauma is the daily experience of it. Going back and working with the actual the actual trauma experience and releasing it from our body to the degree that we're ready to, and moving all that, like compared to what we experience on a daily basis, it's kind of backwards how we hold it in our mind of like, we're trying to protect ourselves from something that's already here,
Yep.
And so when we
And
go,
it's affecting our food, it's affecting
Yeah.
our money, it's affecting our business, it's affecting our current relationships. It's just like that price, like the cost of that is like so expensive,
yeah,
right? The cost of actually going there without even having to relive it in the work that you and I do.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I don't have to take them back to the traumatic experience to help the energy move, and neither do you, right? And so it's just like that investment is the best investment you'll ever make in your life.
Absolutely. And what I found too is, even if that experience does show up again, you're looking at it through such a higher lens that it's again, it's part of the solution. It doesn't feel like this horrible
Well, the
thing that's happening.
frequency's changed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
the frequency's changed.
It's all a different
Yeah.
lens.
Yeah, my favorite
Beautiful.
thing as and for those of you all that practice any sort of financial, emotional, physical sobriety, my favorite thing to experience in life is the same exact thing that used to like send me out of my body and create so much dissonance. And now I'm just like, okay, what else you
Yeah,
got?
so
It's
empowering,
just,
right?
yeah, it's like the best thing ever. Yeah.
Yeah, stand in the room with the monster and just go,
Yeah.
"Hey, what's up?"
Yo, what up? You want to have some tea?
Yeah, you're good. You're good today.
So
Yeah,
good.
well, great conversation. I'm sure we'll be doing this again, because
Yes.
I feel like we just kind of scraped the edge of all the different places we can go. But yeah, and I'll put your contact info in here for folks too that want to learn more about you and your work and how you might
Awesome.
support them. But yeah, it feels really complimentary, both of our works together. So
Yeah.
so beautiful. Yeah, well, thanks so
Yeah.
much for coming
Thank
on,
you.
Amy. And like I said, I'm sure we will do this again.
Yes. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast. And if you did, please subscribe so you can catch the next episode. If you want to learn more about the Aligned Living System and how it could support you in your life, check out davidwaldas.com.